Leib, Tu B'Shvat, what are we doing? Tu B'Shvat? We're gonna skip Tu B'Shvat so we know we have to have a round two, that's all. Okay, just a quick recap because we skipped a week. We were in the middle of behandling Thillim and the grace of Inyan of Thillim. What is Thillim exactly? I mentioned last week a story about Rabbi Yitzchak Alfia, a Mukobel from Yerushalayim, with the school that he had for Thillim, together with the Tainis Dibur and his travels and how he did it. Now, I mentioned also then that Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, in his sefer on Shovavim, takes great offense to this skula. In the mile of skipping a week is that in the interim I was able to get my hands on the sefer, and we'll just start from there. We'll start from there as a postscript, and we'll continue from there. So he brings as follows. He says, in regards to those who substitute the Tanesim and the Pidyonis of Shovavim with the Tainis Dibur, they stay in shul the whole day and they say Tehillim 3 times. And the Mefarsim everywhere, that this is as if one fasted 65,000 Tanesim, so it's turbocharged, and this is the best way to get about it. Tikkun HaKlali says, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfi. Rabbi Yitzchak Alfi made this up. B'Sifrei Kuntres HaYichayeli, V'Stamach B'Davar on Sefer Rachmei Ha'av and Sefer Ayira and other Svarim. But he says, he made it up himself. And this I'll answer and I'll say, She'en Chas V'Shalom Kavanasi L'Zalzel B'Mailas Hashem Repivel L'Shoynei. I'm not Chas V'Shalom coming to be Mezalzel in the wonderful Mailah that a person could achieve by watching what comes out of his mouth. She'en Safik Shu Davar Gadol V'Atzim Oid. He says, V'gam al Skulas Amiras at Tehillim Shleisha Pamim, on the school of saying Tehillim 3 times in a row, B'yayim Echad, Ein Safik Shu Davar Gadol. He says, B'vadei, it's a big thing. Me'achar Shehevi came to Sefer Rachmei Ha'av. It comes from a good source, from the Sefer Rachmei Ha'av, which is a big Sefer Musmuch in Kabbalah. Aval Harach Dvarim Elu, to elevate the stature of this tikkun, of these words, L'umas Divrei Moran Arizal, to put them on the same level as the words of the Arizal, the tikkunim that the Arizal set up. V'negei l'tikkun Achet B'Shrashay, says Dvarim Elu and Divrei Nevius. That's in Ganzen misguided. That doesn't exist. It says, Me'achar Sh'Rabbeinu Arizal Gila Seidis Hatainis B'Misparim K'Mishpatam. The Arizal was Megala exactly the right numbers and the amount of Tanesim and Pidyonis that a person has to do. So Mela, that's the way to do it, and you have to ignore the Skulas at Tehillim and the school of Tainis Dibur. Then he continues, and he handles. He says, V'hagam Sheyesh Makim Lismach, he says, Lahaskim Shalabalabatim Yireim V'Charedim Shadashu B'Tshuvasim Shanim Rabbis. Balabatim, who are not shaykh to real learning, who are being oisik in tshuva, says for them, if they would sit, let them sit that day and say Tehillim 3 times, because Seif Kol Seif, he says Tehillim is some variety of learning, he says. So even if a person will just sit and say Tehillim the whole day, he's doing some learning, he says. But Avada for a Talmud Chacham, someone who could learn for real, Tehillim is not learning on the same level as sitting and learning through a sugya. So, to say that a Talmud Chacham should sit the whole day and say Tehillim 3 times in a row, that's Bittul Torah. That's what he ends off. That's how Rabbi Yaakov ends off critiquing this member of Mitzvah Alfiyah. Now, so this leads us right to the next part that we're up to today. Is we started off with the premise that the Maila and the Skula and the Schos of Amiras Tehillim is because it's like Limud Torah. And we brought the Deacon Rambam and the Gemara in Shavuos, the Gemara in Nedarim, and Shem Zalman Auerbach, who said this way, the Baal Tanya said this way. Now, the Tzad Shekeneged, so Reish Rishon amongst them, there's a famous Nefesh HaChaim, I think most people have seen it, the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Daled Perek Beis, right when he starts off proving that Limud HaTorah is not about Dveikus. The Nefesh HaChaim starts off in Shar Daled Perek Aleph, and he says, there are people who say that the whole Tachlis of Limud HaTorah is Dveikus, to be Davak and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not so, that's not the Tachlis of Limud HaTorah. And then in Perek Beis, the next piece that he uses to drive home this point is he brings as follows. He says, Kayidua, the Medrash tells us that David HaMelech davened HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Amiras Tehillim should have the same validity, the same power as Negoim V'Alis, as learning Negoim V'Alis. Says Rav Chaim Volozhiner, if Torah is just about Dveikus, if Torah is just about coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what was David HaMelech's tefillah? There is no better Dveikus than saying Tehillim. Of course, watch someone who's saying Tehillim, watch someone who's learning Bava Kama, who's engaged in Dveikus more. There's no Shaila that David HaMelech had nothing to daven for then. He says, Elamai, David HaMelech verstanden that Torah is not about Dveikus. Torah is about Torah. Torah Lishma. And Tehillim is Dveikus. And David HaMelech was davening that let Tehillim also have the Malyusa of Isaac ben Egoim v'Alas. So it says of Chaim V'Lazhner, it's a raya that Tehillim, that Torah is not Dveikus. But between the lines, what do you see? Between the lines, that Chaim V'Lazhner is categorizing Tehillim as Dveikus. Chaim V'Lazhner is saying Tehillim is Dveikus. Torah l'chud, Dveikus l'chud. And then he ends off with this line where he says, in Befrat, Lo Yadinam, we don't even know if David Melech's tefillah was answered. So meaning, Tehillim kvaydim kaim emunach. It's a chashav zach, it's dveikus, but it's dveikus, it's tefillah. It's not in the same category as Torah. So that's, for starters, that's a famous of Chaim V'Lazhner. Additionally, there's a shmuz in the Paiskim, two shmuzes in the Paiskim actually, that prove to us that Tehillim might not be considered limud Torah. One of them's from a halachic angle, and one of them's from a Kabbalah angle. So let's just do the halacha one first, and then the Kabbalah one. Mitzad halacha, there's a din that dvarim shebiksav yat reshayla imam al peh. Something that's a pasuk, something that's a pasuk in the Torah, you're not supposed to say it al peh. You're supposed to read it min aksav. Now, the question is, how can we do all the Tehillim, all the Psukei Zimra that we do, that we read, Tehillim that people say, Shigru Delishan about Peh all the time. I Dvarim Shebiksav Yat R'Shelim Al Peh. If it's Mikra, if it's words from the Torah, you're not allowed to say Dvarim Shebiksav Yat R'Shelim Al Peh. So the Chavas Yair has a tshuva about this. The Chavas Yair and tshuva Kuf Ayin Vav. Zok the Chavas Yair. I should read it. I have it somewhere. Chavas Yair says, this that people say Tehillim, he says, Bevadai, Tehillim is part of Ksuvim, and it could be Torah, it's a chelik of Torah, etc. But this that everyone says, Tehillim, says the Chavas Yair, is Bevadai, they're saying it. He says as follows. He says, Shekol Mashanu Oimrim Beis HaKnesses Psukei Zimra. This that everyone says in the Beis HaKnesses Psukei Zimra, Baruch Hashem La'olam Amen V'Amen, Ahi Ben Saya Arein, Benucha Yomar, all these different Psukei at Tehillim that are built in standard into our Tefillah. Hakolheim Shvachis V'Hoidayis V'Rachamim V'Tachnunim L'fnei HaMakim. They're all Shevach, V'Hoidah, V'Rachamim, V'Tachnunim in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're not Torah. And this is the punchline, the lav l'shem Torah nagul kain. He says it's pashut that they're not doing it l'shem Torah nagul kain, rak l'oira rachamim. It's l'oira rachamim, u'lahazkir chasdei David and emanim, u'lahaver gelulim, and he's going to continue and he goes on to a few different nekudas. But he says, bevadai, the tehillim that people are saying in the Beis Medrash, and tehillim that's built into davening, is bevadai not bekivun to be Torah, it's bekivun to be rachamim. That's from a halacha perspective. From a Kabbalistic perspective, the Arizal in the Shara Mitzvahs, the Arizal writes, it's a famous thing, it gets negay on Friday nights and Thursday nights, but the Arizal writes that a person is not supposed to learn Mikra Balayla. A person is not supposed to learn anything from Chumash at nighttime. Because kafi, the way the day is divided up, Laila is a Zman for Torah Shebal Peh, and Yom is a time for Torah Shebiksav, and if a person flips and does Torah Shebiksav Balayla, it doesn't do good things. And there's actually early makar for this. There's a Yalkut Shemaini that brings down that it says, Kisha Moshe Rabbeinu l'marim, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shemayim, how did he know Emes HaYom ve'Emes HaLayla? It says, B'zman she'melamdoi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was melamdoi, Ksa Mikra, Yodesh HaYom, B'zman shalimdoi, I forgot the word, maybe Gemara, or I think B'zman shalimdoi Gemara, Yodesh HaLayla. Meaning, I feel in Shemayim, the Anhaga was that by Yom it's Mikra and by Laila is Gemara. So there's a din from the Arizal, Al Pi Kabbalah, not to learn Mikra by Laila. Now, if you remember, the way we started with this 3 weeks ago was that the minig of Shavim was to stay up late on a Thursday night, the whole night, and say Tehillim the whole Thursday night. That was the minig of Tehillim on Shavim. So if the schos of Tehillim is Limud HaTorah, and that's what you're doing Tehillim for, then it doesn't make any sense. It's l'chatchila avegishtel to do it balayla. Now there's a tumult amongst the call it the Sifrei HaKabbalah, if there's a difference between the first half of the night until Chatzos and the second half of the night from Chatzos and on. Some Sefer has a tshuva about it, Rav Yosef has a tshuva about it. There is room to wiggle. That could be different parts of the Laila are not actually usher in Tehillim as much as other parts. But b'chol ofen, there certainly is some sort of issue to learn Tehillim. And Ad Kedei Kach that the Chidah in Yosef Aimitz, the Chidah has a tshuva about this, but the Chidah writes as follows. Says the Chidah, you do Abishem the Kisvei Arizal from the Shara Mitzvahs that a person is not supposed to learn Mikra Balayla. Says Lamaisa, lots of people say Tehillim Balayla. Says the Chidah. Says, how you talking? What's going on? So says the Chidah, it's borrowed to him that Tehillim is not included in the Sisser. This that we say not to learn Mikra Balayla, that's a limud of Mikra Balayla. If a person's learning Mikra Balayla. But to say Tehillim, which is Tefillah v'Tachnunim, that's not included in a person can do that Balayla. So the Chidah is clearly delineating based on this halach, this Kabbalistic Isser, that Tehillim is an exception. Tehillim is not that. But for the Chidah, He says, this is a psak for anybody who's asking me. But Anila Atzmi, he says, I'm afraid, and I don't say Tehillim Balayla. This is talking about the Chidasas. The Chidasas himself, I'm afraid of these different spheres and these different things that are Muskar and Kabbalah, and I don't say Tehillim Balayla. Says the Chidal about himself. But Al Kapanim, we have, from a halachic point of view, from a Kabbalistic point of view, that clearly there's another way to look at Tehillim. Tehillim as a tefillah, not as Torah. So let's just take it back to the source for a second. I think the earliest place where it's mushush by us, that Tehillim is real tefillah, is that every morning when we come to shul, the tefillahs that we start off with are Tehillim. When we start Pesukei D'Zimra, the tefillahs we start off with are Tehillim. So if you look, the Torah in Siman Nun Aleph, the Torah brings down the din of Pesukei D'Zimra. The Torah says as follows. He starts off in Siman Nun Aleph, he says, Baruch Sha'amar, we have to say V'nigun u'b'ni'ima. And then he says, V'nistakna brachazu. This bracha Baruch Sha'amar was nistakin, to be the bracha Pesachas, the opening bracha of Pesukei D'Zimra. Mishum had the Isa b'perak kol kisvei HaKodesh. Because of this Gemara that it says in Shabbos, where it says, Yehei chelki im goymrei hala b'chol yom. The Gemara in Shabbos says that the Yehei chelki, it should be my portion with people who are goymer hala b'chol yom. In fact, the Gemara Akasha, it says, if you goymer hala b'chol yom, it's a terrible thing, because you're being maktin HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nisim. If you say hala l'gadol every day, it shows that a day when there is a nest, a day when there isn't a nest, it's all the same. You're being maktin the nisim. So the Gemara says, umaskinon, we come out, kika amar b'psukei d'Zimra. When the Gemara says there's an Indian to be goymer halal, it means saying Pesukei D'Zimra. Umayniu, what is the Pesukei D'Zimra? And this, the Rif and the Rosh and other Rishonim on the Gemara explain. Rashi, Mayniu, Tehillu l'David ad kol neshama talukah. From the Pesukim and Tehillim that starts with Ashrei, and it's completed by kol neshama talukah. So it's built into the Tefillah in a standardized doifin, Medina the Gemara already, for 2,000 years, to say Pesukei D'Zimra as part of our Tefillah. And then the Gemara, the Torah continues, he says, V'su, Garsinon Parakama de Brachas, Amr V'Lazar, Kalayim Etilu L'David B'chal Yom, Muftach Le'Shu Ben Elam Haba. Someone who says Asher every day, 3 times a day, Muftach Le'Shu Ben Elam Haba. V'chein, and this is the punchline, V'chein Darash of Simloi, La'olam Yisadar Adam Shvachish Al Malka, and V'achakach Yispalo. A person should always be Mesadar, the Shvachim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then he should daven. L'kach, Tiknu La'imrim Kaidem Atfilah. They are Mesakin to say these Psukim, these Mizmori Tehillim, before Tefillah. Now, so there's 2 things in this Torah. First of all, this is how it comes to be, that it's so standardized and so pashut to all of us that Tehillim is Tefillah, because we say it in our Tefillahs every single day. But if you noticed carefully, there's a diik though that the Torah refers to Tefillah as Tefillah, and it refers to these as Shvachim Kaidem HaTefillah. The person says Shvachim Kaidem HaTefillah. Now, I noticed that there's, if you look up the Makar, the earliest brisa that brings down this din is in Masechta Seifrim. In Masechta Seifrim, in the end of Parak Yud Zayin, the Nusach in the Masechta Seifrim is as follows: La'olam yispalel adam sheish mizmayrim halalu kaidem tefillasei. A person should daven these sheish mizmayrim before he does his tefillah. So over there, it refers to it as tefillah, and it also very importantly stresses that it should be kaidem tefillasei. So there's an interesting explanation in the whole tachlis of this Pesukei D'Zimra, what these tefillahs are and why they're dafka put before our tefillahs. What the shidduch over here, what these tefillahs are and why they're put over there. It's Yedua, the Gemara, the Pasuk in Thillim says, David Melech says, Zmiris hayil lichukecha. The Torah was like Zmiris for me, it was songs. And the Gemara in Seitu says, Chazal say, David Melech was nenash because of that, because he called the Torah Zmiris. But David Melech says, Zmiris hayil lichukecha. Now, the taich of Zmiris normally is songs. Zmiris hayil lichukecha. There's a sefer, Shari Oira, it's an early Kabbalah, early Mekubal sefer, it's quoted like, it makes it a lot to halacha. It made it, interestingly, it was translated into Latin in the 1400s, the Sefer Shari Eira. You could still buy it, like today, on Google, on Amazon, like in English, the Sefer Shari Eira. It's like a Kabbalah Sefer from the, late 12 or 1300s that was translated into Latin and then into English. It was actually used extensively in debates, like between Christians and Jews throughout the Deiris. This Sefer was used as an important, flashpoint for some reason. That's why it was translated into Latin and English, etc., but in the Sefer Shari Eira, it says as follows, and this is quoted by a lot of the Poskim and a lot of the Sfarim, that the lashon of Zmiris, when we say Pesukei D'Zimra, Zmiris hayil lichukecha, doesn't mean song. What Zmiris means is lashon Zomer, exactly. Lashon Zomer means lashon cutting, but cutting away the blockages, the things that could get in a person's way when he's going to daven, cutting away anything that could be in a person's way before he starts his tefillah. So, la'olam yispalel adam sheish mizmayrim halalu, these Pesukei D'Zimra, these psukim that cut through all the things that are in the way, and then you daven your real tefillah. In order to make sure you're heard, you daven these. So now, what's this special power that's infused in Tehillim, that it's Pesukei D'Zimra, that it cuts through more than everything else? So it's brought down in a lot of there's many sources. It's hard to point to like a specific one that the Makar is, but there's many that say similar. Is that I'll say it over the most yeshivish way, but it's said lots of different ways. But I'll say it over the most yeshivish way. There's a famous brisker ala Torah. The brisker says by Yaakov Avinu b'charbi ubekashti. Yaakov Avinu says I fought with b'charbi ubekashti. Says Rashi. It says Onkelos b'yusi b'tzlusi b'yusi. That's what Onkelos teaches. So my davening and my tefillas. So Brisker asks, famous Brisker, what's the difference between Slusi and B'yusi? Char B'kashti, Tefillah and Bakasha. Says Brisker, there are tefillas that it's built in inherently. The tefillah has power. The way the words are structured and the way the Anshe Knesset Agdela or David HaMelech put into the words of this tefillah, the power gives it a certain inherent power. One who wields it is like wielding a sword. A sword is sharp. Whatever direction you wave it, it's going to cut. And he said, then there are those tefillahs that are more targeted. It depends on who's shooting it. It's like an arrow. That's B'charbi B'kashti. It's like an arrow. An arrow is totally useless if it's not aimed at the right location. So Mishkov explained the B'charbi B'kashti is that there are tefillahs that have inherent power and there are tefillahs that have targeted power based on where you send them and how you send them, how you use them. Many svarim, but this is the most yeshivish iteration of this vart, say that Thillim, when David HaMelech stellte weg Thillim through every matziv and through every tzara and through every simcha that he found himself in, what he was doing is he was infusing Thillim with the koyach to be a cherev. Thillim to be able to be this cherev that could just cut through anything, any mini, anything that's in the way. And Chazal, the Anshe Knesset Agdela, already 2,000 years ago, understood this amazing power and potential that David HaMelech infused Thillim with, and therefore chose to lead off all tefillas with this Psukei de Zimra. These pruning shears, you want to call them, these pruning shears that David HaMelech built in, that Thillim is able to cut through everything. There's beautiful words from the Malbim. The Malbim writes in his Hakdama to Thillim, the Malbim writes, he says, Thillim, he says, he calls it, Beis Kodesh Akdashim. It's a Beis Kodesh Akdashim, Beis HaOitzer, a storehouse, Hayakir Hazeh, Kol Ha'adam, every person, Yachzebay, Kol Tfilah, V'chol Tchina, Kol Haydah, V'chol Tehila, Al Kol Davar, V'al Kol Inyan, Tztaka, Yeshua, Tzara, Revacha, Shir, Liyachad, El Rabim. He says, David HaMelech built into this Tehillim every potential, every feeling, every emotion, the whole kaleidoscope of emotions that a Jew could experience, the ups, the downs, it's all built in. David HaMelech expressed it in there already in a way that everyone could just pick it up and run with it, and it has its power built into it already. Now, I'll just, one more nakuda on this nakuda. There's a Yerushalmi in the Brachas, in the 9th parak. Yerushalmi says as follows. Yerushalmi says, Avodah Zarah, it's another place also, Avodah Zarah is nira kreva ve'enei ala rechaika. It appears to be very close, but it's really very far. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nira rachik ve'enei ala karev. HaKadosh Baruch Hu seems to be very far and really is very close. And the mashal is simple. And Avodah Zarah, you hold in your hand, you dive into it, it's right in front of you. Nira kreva, it's right here. But ve'enei ala rachik, because it can't answer you. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Gemara goes on to express like how big the Shemayim is, and we have other Gemaras that do this. You know, how many hundreds of years it would take you to traverse from here to here to there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nira rachika, he's very far. The heavens are tremendous, and we don't know where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Ve'enei ala kreva. And the Gemara brings two psukim for this, Yerushalmi. The first pasuk the Gemara brings is Shenemar kimi B'chol kareinu love, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right in front of us every time we call him. I'm blanking on the actual words. And then the Gemara brings a second pasuk, and it brings from Tehillim, and it says as follows. It says, another drasha, Shenamar, Tfilah la'ani ki yatev. Now, if you think about it, the Mepharshim over there ask, it's a strange pasuk. Well, what does Tfilah la'ani ki yatev have to do with Hashem being nira rechaika ve'enei ala kreva? What's the shaykhis? So some Mepharshim say balabatish, because the end of the pasuk is Tfilah la'ani ki yatev, u'lefnei Hashem yishbech sichai. In front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But lefnei doesn't imply any particular closeness. It could be very far, lefnei. But some say that. If you look in the Medrash, Sheikh Tayv and Tehillim, there's a beer there from the Re'im. It brings a Zayar HaKadosh. It says, when it says, David Melech says, Tfilah la'ani ki yatev, David Melech was not talking about the ani in the picture here, like an ani who's davening. Tfilah la'ani is, David Melech is describing the power that he built into the tefillah. Tfilah la'ani is, I gave you a tefillah of an ani. Fashtetzach, a tefillah of an ani gets answered much quicker, because a guy's, vein gizachais with true emotion, with true feeling, he's pasha broken, he has no one to turn to, and he comes to you, that tefillah doesn't fall on deaf ears. Such a type of tefillah penetrates much deeper. So the Zohar says, David Melech is describing the potency of the tefillah. It's a tefillah la'ani. I gave you a tefillah that has the power of tefillah la'ani. And that's what we say when the Yerushalmi says, nira rachik ve'enei lekarev is because when you know which tefillas to say and you have these proper tefillas that could cut through the psukei de zimra, that could cut through all the haze and get to everything, so then you have the ability to have that tefillah that's like a cherev. So, memela, to answer a pasha question, everybody knows if there's a tzara that comes to Klal Yisrael, so we close the Gemaras and you open it to Thillim. We start davening right away. Now, the kasha would have been very pashut. How do you stop learning Bava Kama, Be'i, and stop learning whatever you're learning and go on to do Tehillim? L'chayra, you're mamash missing the boat, right? You're going from Menachamer Lakal. And the teretz is that there's many chazals to this extent that a mitzvah she'ef shalasli le'cherim. Rambam says during a shas tzara, as person's mechuyev to daven, meaning there's many of these chazals. So it's pashut that if a person is faced with a tzara, he closes his gemara and he takes this tefillah that's going to have this power built into it and daven with it. Now, I just want to say like an interesting tidbit about this idea of Tehillim having so much built into the Oisius and so much power built into it as follows. I'll share with you like this. It's a shtickle, well-known thing, but it's interesting anyhow. There's the Arzarua is a sefer on many different halachas. It's from the Rabbi Yitzchak of Vina, one of the greatest Rishonim, a Talmud of the Rekeach. Now his name is Rabbi Yitzchak of Vina, and the name Arzarua has nothing to do with Yitzchak, as far as I can tell. If someone can think of a creative way that has to do with Yitzchak, so literally the first page of the sefer, he starts off. He brings the pasuk into Thillim. He says, Ar Zarua latzadik el yishrei lev simcha. He says, Karasi b'shem zeh achibur. You want to know why I named this sefer Ar Zarua? He says as follows, Ani ha-mechaber Yitzchak bar Moshe, nechibi yiseri shemetzasi b'zeh mikra. I found a special connection, a special kinship, a special beauty in this pasuk of Ar Zarua latzadik el yishrei lev simcha. He says, why? And if you look in other svarim, it's brought down, the Seder Darius brings down, this was a dream that he had. He says as follows, because Seifei Tevis, Reb Akiva. The last letter of each word of Ar Zarua Latzadik is Reb Akiva. The last letter of Ar is Reish, Ayin, Kof, Yod, Vez, Simcha. Reb Akiva. Now, there's one very important diak over here. There's a shaila in the Poskim how to spell the name Akiva. Do you spell Akiva with a hey, or do you spell Akiva with an aleph? And this is very negay if a person's writing a ksuba or a get or etc. So says the Ar Zarua, I had a dream. I was tifarayin in the middle of the sugi of Shemis Begitin, and I wasn't sure, do I spell Akiva with an aleph, Akiva with a hey? And in a dream, it lit up for me this pasuk, Ar Zarua Latzadik el yishrei lev simcha, where the Seifei Tevis is Reb Akiva with a hey. It says, and Mikan I understood that the proper way to spell this ois, the proper way to spell this name is Akiva with a hey, because the pasuk in Tehillim, which is not talking about how to spell the name Akiva, the Seifei Tevis spells it out that way, and he says, Ashrecha Reb Akiva. Lucky is Rabbi Akiva that because Rabbi Akiva was so focused on every diak that could come from an ois, that could come from a tag, that could come from anything, Rabbi Akiva was leichot to be the messenger who through Tehillim revealed to me this diak in the pasuk, this like backhanded diak of Ar Zarua Latzadik L'Yishrei Lev Simcha. And because of this one daher that he had, this one gilui that came to him, he names the whole sefer 3 fat volumes on literally halachas on Kol Terakula Ar Zarua after this name. So it's just a remez bulvad, but it's again seeing how much is built into the words, the letters, how much is put into the letters. Just one more remez like this, the Tmanya Apin in Kapitel Peites, this is a Rekeach, it's like a crazy dig. The Rekeach says there are 4 psukim amongst the 100, I don't know how many psukim are in there even, the hundreds maybe of psukim that are in the Tmanya Apin that only have four words in them. There are 4 psukim that have 4 words. And amongst those, cumulatively, those 4 psukim, is every letter of the Aleph is in there at least once, except for Gimel, Zayin, Lamed, Gezel. It says, why? L'ramez l'cha, that Gezel is possible by Daled Minim. As Isaac the Rekeach. Like, the crazy diukim of missing oisius and missing letters, and just the way the Rishonim looked at Tehillim as a how oiskitzeichent and how careful every letter and every combination was put together. The way the Rishonim, the Rekeach, and those who looked at it, just shows us this type of built-in inherent power that David HaMelech was creating with the words of Tehillim. Now, I just think, Adasina Lahachi, we might as well just end off with this. I think we should just talk about Rav Nachman's Tikkun HaKlali a little bit, because it's also Tehillim, it also has to do with these Averis, it's also Shavim worthy. Let's just talk about Rav Nachman's Tikkun HaKlali for a minute. Rav Nachman, the Sipur of Rav Nachman's Avegishtelling Tikkun HaKlali is like it's a big thing. It's mentioned lots of times in his different svarim, and he writes that he was withheld. Originally, he writes that he was withheld from releasing it. Many tzaddikim tried to mine from Tehillim the specific mizmorim that would be the Tikkun HaKlali. They'll be misakin everything from the greatest averis to the smallest averis, and were withheld from doing it. He writes some of them forgot it in the middle, some of them got sick, some of them had other manias, meaning he says it was a big challenge, a ruchniistic challenge, to be able to mine from the Tehillim, the Tikkun HaKlali. And he writes, at some point in Likutei Moharan, he writes that he has it. He has 10 Mizmorei Tehillim that are the Tikkun HaKlali, but he doesn't write what they are. Now, if you move over to just a brief moment of history, Rav Nachman lived in the late 1800s, and he dies, the late 1700s, and he dies in the early 1800s. He dies at about 38 years old. He was sick a good portion of his life. I think he had tuberculosis. He dies at 38. He has a Talmud Chaver, someone who's close to his age, Rav Nassan of Nemerev. Rav Nassan is I think maybe like 7 or 8 years younger than Rav Nachman, very close in age. He only meets Rav Nachman the last 6 or 7 years of Rav Nachman's life, when Rav Nachman moves to Barditchev, and he lived in a small town near Barditchev, and they meet up with each other, and Rav Nassan's life changes. He had plans, he was going to do whatever he was going to do, his plans change, and he becomes totally aduk and davuk to Rav Nachman, and he starts spending months at a time with him, and now he charts the course of how hard it was to pry the Tikkun HaKlali out of Rav Nachman. He writes that I went the first time, and I heard from other Talmidim who were there longer than me, that Rav Nachman has a Tikkun HaKlali that he would share with Thillim, and I asked him, and he told me, no, it's not the time to say. He says, the next time I came, several months later, Rav Nachman was sick in bed, and I noticed on his table, by his bedside table, he had scribbled down 10 psukim in Tehillim, 10 different kapitals in Tehillim. I assumed it was the Tikkun HaKlali, so I looked at it, I stole a glance, and then I felt terrible. How could I look at the Rebbe's paper, something he didn't want to show me yet? And he says, Machmas Pachad, that I did something wrong from looking at it when I didn't have permission. I forgot it. I wasn't able to commit it to memory. He says, I'm on my way out. Now knowing that it was there already, I went and I asked Rav Nachman, maybe now the Rebbe wants to share with me the Tikkun HaKlali. Still not the right time. And he leaves. And he says, and I meant to remember it, but Machmas Pachad, that I did something wrong, I forgot it. He says, Tzim Saif, literally months before he dies, when I was there, I heard that now he's telling, and I quickly transcribed it, and he told over to us the 10 kapitlach, and he explained a little bit what the malyusa of these 10 are, and what the tziruf of these 10 are, and this is the Tikkun HaKlali that everyone needs to know and that everyone needs to use. Now, the first edition of the Tikkun HaKlali was printed in Reb Nassan's house. In Reb Nassan's house, his son printed a Tikkun HaKlali. It's about, 8-10 pages long. Tehillim, it has a small hakdama. It's available on the Israel Museum, has it like scanned in. That's where I got it from. I don't know who has the original copy of it. But in the hakdama there, so he writes a little bit about the background, about how difficult it was to get the Tikkun HaKlali out of Rav Nachman. And then he writes some of the Kabbalistic, Tzirufei Yosius and the Gematrius and what means what. And this part I just want to read. I'm going to butcher it because it's in Yiddish, but this is where it comes from, the famous Arois Chapim from Gehenim. So it's kedai just to read it once we're on the topic. He says, Achakach, koydem istalkusei HaKadosh, after he was nostalgic, Amar kol mi sheyaveh al kivri, anyone will come on my kever, v'yitem prutul tzedakah, and give a prutul tzedakah, v'yoymar elu ha'asara kapitlach tehillim, and will say these 10 kapitlach tehillim, these Tikkun HaKlali that I created, yoymram ech sheyoymram, no grace of kavanas, just say them, just spit them out, like we're saying, that Tehillim has it built in already. One doesn't have to work too hard to access the latent power that's in Tehillim. Yomrim ech sheyomrim, eshtada b'kol koichi lasis le'teva. I'll try my best to do good for him. V'amar b'zeh alashon, here's the Yiddish, it's an old, ancient Yiddish, I'll try. Yeah, he's quoting what Rav Nachman said. Yeah, he's quoting what Rav Nachman said. And he writes in Yiddish, ich will mir liegen in der, I can't even read it. I can't even read it, but it's here in Yiddish. If someone wants to try, in 2 lines, he says basically what we said. He says it in Yiddish, but here's that famous line by the Payas, "Velechem trosh ziehen from Shel Tachtas." By the Payas, I'll grab him out of Shel Tachtas. This is that famous line that everyone knows that Rav Nachman says, and it has to do with the hisyastis of the Tikkun HaKlali, which whether or not me and you say Tikkun HaKlali, it definitely relies on the same Havana that Tehillim has an inherent automatic power built into it that, if harnessed correctly, could be used for many different things. I think in the Chassidish Welt, not just by Breslov, Marshall and Spink in Eretz Yisrael, and I know Rabbi Eilish of Satmar used to tell people to say it. Meaning in the Chassidish Welt, I don't think it's the like such a out there thing. I mean, some people say Tikkun HaKlali, maybe not every day like in Breslov, but it's a thing. And b'chol even it fits right into how we're describing Tehillim. Yashikayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.